Owning a home, Bob. 26-year-old billionaire Mark Zuckerberg, the star of the smash hit movie now, Social Network, and of course Facebook founder and billionaire, he has chosen month-to-month renting. So apparently, Bob, even billionaires think houses are overpriced.
I think that they're probably right, and with the enormous inventory that's being carried, maybe 6 or 8 times what it normally is, I think it'll be quite a few years before it gets anywhere near to the normal 4 to 5 month inventory in residential houses for sale. So I wouldn't be in any rush to buy a home, that's for sure.
Realtors are now predicting that foreclosures will top 1.2 million this year. That's adding to nearly 1 million last year. So the big question is, what about next year, Bob? What about 2011? Will things get better? Will they deteriorate? Well, hold on to your hat. 1.5 million more foreclosures, approximately, scheduled to hit the market next year.
And I believe that the backup that's been caused by the litigation and investigation of the attorney generals, the lenders demanding just because they didn't have the paperwork that everything should be able to flow through. I mean, they don't understand that America has laws, and the laws are for everybody. And if they broke the law, and then there's no contract. And if they go bankrupt, they go bankrupt.
The real question is, where is the excess coming from? You'll remember that robo-signing mess where lenders were signing off on stacks of potential defaults and foreclosures lining up on their desks, not really looking into the fine details, just signing off of them, throwing them in the out bin, and then processing these foreclosures, foreclosing on people who really didn't deserve to be there, many of them. Hundreds of thousands entered default. All that was frozen for a while. The default process, the foreclosure process came to a temporary halt. Now that that's clearing out, experts are now predicting a fresh supply of houses scheduled to hit the markets next year. But, the real factor here is something that we've been talking about for quite some time. In recent weeks, the unemployment rate has ticked up. It had been stuck between 9.5 and 9.4% in that area for quite some time. Well, it ticked up to 9.6%, and this during the time of the year when unemployment traditionally is low, around the holiday season where additional jobs are usually easy to find, at least temporary jobs. Well, very few people are lining up, though, to buy debt checks when you see 9.6% unemployment. So it looks, Bob, like the next tidal wave that could threaten the housing market is an increase in interest rates. In the past few weeks, mortgage borrowing costs have leaped higher by 1%. Now that may seem small, but it translates into huge dollars for the borrower. Look at it from this perspective. The typical mortgage is about $1,400 a month. That's the mortgage payment. A 1% increase lifts that number to $1,500 a month. Okay, that translates into an increase of 10% in the cost of that mortgage, of that loan. Just new mortgages and adjustable rate mortgages have just become 10% more expensive. Well, what will happen if rates really start to pick up some momentum? A second downdraft in housing. Simply borrowing costs will have climbed far too high. And, of course, what does that do? That increases the expense of the home. For folks who have cash, it's easy to walk right into a house. But for the rest of us, we have to use loans and mortgages. So that makes almost any home 10% more expensive. We jack up another 1%. If we see borrowing costs increase that much, well, then you can expect home prices to increase in their expense as well. So it's just becoming more unaffordable. Just as job losses are at the highest level, house prices are once again turning down. So until unemployment picks up and lending rates stop increasing and the housing resets pass, I can't see a bottom in housing till at least 2012. And in many hard-hit areas, I think it'll take several more years.
And I agree.
Well, Bob, I'm sure you've seen the reports on riots in Greece. The protests broke out over 10% pay cuts as officials attempt to stem the massive credit crisis in their country. And as our resident expert on the nation, I thought I'd give you a chance to talk about what's happening there.
I think the Greek people have come to the conclusion that all of the things that they thought that the government would do wrong, the government has done. As you know, Mr. Papandreou is a Bilderberger, and he wants to make sure that the banks get paid. And the banks were the ones that caused the problem in the first place. And more people in Greece and in other places are realizing that we have this banker problem. And the money that's being given to Greece and now in process in Ireland is really to bail the banks out. At the same time, they want to cut salaries 10%. They want to lay off 1/3 of their employees that work for the government. And that's okay if you spread it out over 3 or 4 or 5 years. It's just like taxes. It's okay to increase the taxes, but don't do it all at once. The economy can't take it. And there's massive unemployment in Greece now, and has been for the last 9 months to a year. And so I expect that this rioting is going to continue, and it's going to get worse. And we've seen it in Paris, and we've seen it in Italy this week. The people are so upset with Berlusconi, and they're not communists, because the last time the communists were in, they made a dreadful mess out of the government. And so they're not going to replace government when Berlusconi and his gang are rejected. We've seen something very, very important happen in England. Students being told they have to pay 3 times more to go to school. And they're saying, hey, wait a minute. I mean, we're the guys and gals who are going to make England work in the future. And here we got the royal family and their whole entourage of thousands who are filthy rich. And people not only can't go to school because now it's going to be only for the rich, you also have people who are having their social support cut. And these people are in their 70s and 80s. They're desperate. They can't even live. And so you're going to have trouble in England that you've never had before. What am I saying? It's going to get worse. And incidentally, if you hadn't noticed, Hungary is now taking money out of the pension plans and using it to reduce their deficit. The French Assembly last week did the same thing. They're talking about it in England. What's going to happen in America? They're going to try to do the same thing. You look at the 401ks and IRAs, we're at $6 trillion. It's a juicy piece of change. And so I think that this social disturbances are going to get a lot worse.
This is a theme that's developing, Bob. I mean, what Gerald Celente refers to as when people lose everything, they simply lose it. And that's what you're seeing happening in Europe. You know, you're also seeing it in Great Britain. There's, I think, another aspect of this. In my discussion with James Turk, second hour of this week's show, James Turk goes into detail regarding this trend that's starting to emerge of banks withholding clients' gold and silver bullion within not just deposit boxes, but other means as well. This is an alarming trend, raising a lot of red flags in the industry. It's something, frankly, that you and I have been anticipating for at least 5 years here on Goldseek Radio. Well, it's coming to pass. James Turk is very alarmed by the trend. There was a story that we talk about of one fellow who had $40 million in gold. They refused to return it. It took 2 months of legal wrangling. Another had 2,000 ounces of silver in Switzerland, was denied his requests for them to return his metal as well. A very good friend I heard from this week, I was best man at his wedding. He's keeping his precious metals, his gold coins, in a bank vault. Very concerned next time I talk to him, I'm going to suggest to remove them from that, because that even in the land of the free here, your safety deposit boxes during the time of Roosevelt were considered government property, and the only way you could even open them, unseal a safety deposit box, was with a government official standing behind your shoulders. Could history repeat? Maybe not, but it certainly is starting to rhyme a bit here. So it's something to keep in mind going forward. Before we move on, I want to share something with our Roku and Netflix folks out there. If you are a Roku buff, and you'd like up to 20 or 30 private channels. This is a new trend. It's very exciting. There are numerous channels out there that you can add to your Roku store, and by simply going to the web page and typing in the secret password. Well, I've got a list of them, and I want to share that list. It's a private list of these private channels, and I'll be glad to send that to you via email, so gsr@hughes.net if you'd like that. Also, Goldseek Radio has created its own Roku channel. That's right, I've created a private Roku channel, so you can watch and listen to Goldseek Radio now on your TV and listen to all kinds of things now through Roku, and I've got the passcodes for both. So if you want to add Goldseek Radio to your private channel, it's just in the beta stages. There's nothing there yet, but you can just type in 888, that's our number, and you'll have the Goldseek Radio Roku channel. Opening up the phone lines.
Hi there, my name is Joe calling from Enumclaw, Washington. Calling because I haven't found any information as far as the purchasing value of gold in a hyperinflationary environment. You know, lots of numbers are out there about, you know, how many paper, marks or Zimbabwe dollars or whatever, but, you know, there's nothing that I haven't found any information that describes, physical things you could buy, how many acres of land in this kind of environment, how many heads of cattle, real things. So I was wondering if you guys had any resources or information you could point me towards. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.
First, it's Joe. He calls in from Washington, and he would like to know how many real tangible objects can really be bought with physical gold during a hyperinflation. Apologies for sounding like a broken record here, but, my book, Wealth Building Strategies, as well as Fiat Money, Inflation in France, Dying of Money, they give the best real-world examples that I know of the amazing purchasing power of 1 ounce of gold during hyperinflation. Let me give you an example. There are stories that a bellhop at a posh Berlin hotel received a big tip one day, a 1 ounce gold mark. Well, he tucked it away in his mattress for safekeeping, and a few years later, during the Weimar inflation, he allegedly took that gold coin and negotiated the purchase of the hotel he used to work at for 1 gold coin. Fiction, we don't know, but it's a rumor. That gives you one idea. Dixon White also talks about the astounding purchasing power of gold during the French Revolution. For instance, I live in the southern United States. After the end of the Civil War, 1 ounce of gold would frankly purchase practically anything in the South. Estates, sprawling estates, multi-acres with giant mansions. Easily, a small handful of gold coins could have purchased just about anything you wanted. To give you an idea of the ravages of inflation, some folks claim it approached 6,000 to 7,000% here in the South, which basically means that a dollar is worth far less than a penny. But gold, well, it would move in the opposite direction, conversely related, and that's what happened. So there's a few real examples. Bob, anything that you've seen, maybe in Zimbabwe, for instance, or in other places?
Well, in Zimbabwe, it wasn't coins. There were sovereigns around, but most of it was in nugget form or in gold grain form. And there's markets that exist today and have for the last several years where people would go and have their gold weighed, and then they would buy a bushel of this and a bushel of that. And that's how it's worked there, and that's the way it would work any place in the world.
All right, well, let's move on now to Kerry.
Hey, Chris and Bob. It's Kerry calling from Armonk, New York. George had a question about life in the Weimar Republic. Jim Sinclair had a recent excerpt of an article published. German lady went to visit her relatives in Switzerland in 1920, and she received a letter from her banker saying, look, you've got 600,000 Reichmarks in your account. That was the equivalent of about $70,000. I think that the currency is depreciating, and you should think about hedging your bets, basically. Unfortunately, she was ill. She had TB and injured herself. 2 years later, she gets a letter, not from that banker, but from the bank, saying, we're really sorry, but your account is way too small, and please close it as soon as possible. And again, she was still ill. And then in 1923, a letter comes from the bank, and finally she's recuperated. She opens the letter. It says, accounts too small, enclosed. We didn't have any bills small enough to pay you off. Enclosed, you'll find 1 million Reichmarks. Have a good life. And she looks at the stamp on the envelope, and it's a 1 million Reichmark stamp. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And that's why I think everybody should take on the maximum amount of debt that they can afford, buy gold and silver. That's your hedge. Just make sure that you can afford to pay the minimum monthly payment. And eventually what happened in the Reichsmark Republic was that creditors would hide from their debtors. They didn't want to get paid off because the debtors would bring huge amounts of cash to pay off what was a large loan previously, and therefore the creditors didn't want to get paid off and they would hide. Anyway, always a pleasure. You guys be well.
And Kerry from Armark, New York, a longtime listener, great friend of the show, he says there's a story of a German lady who visited relatives in Switzerland in 1920. She'd become ill and was unable to withdraw her funds, would amount to about $70,000 U.S. 3 years later, she received a $1 million Reichsmark note with a letter apologizing, saying, we couldn't find notes small enough to give you your $70,000. So we're just going to give you this $1 million note. The envelope was stamped with a $1 million stamp. What amounted to $70,000 increased many fold, but it was worthless. And Kerry says the same thing could happen here. We're heading down the same path thanks to Mr. Bernanke. Got gold?
That's what I got. And I don't see any other way to protect your assets. You've got gold bullion, you've got gold coins, and you've got gold shares. So you can mix them up or whatever's suitable for you, but it's the only place to be.
All right, closing down the phone lines. And reaching into the mailbag.
Letters. Oh, we get letters. We get your letters every day.
Another Joe writes in and he says he would like to know how to call in to the program. Well, hi, Joe. You know, if you're in the United States, and I think Canada as well, we have a toll-free number for you, so please just listen in. And at the end of this segment, we will share that number. You shouldn't find it very difficult at all. Next up, Darren says he listens to the show every week. He's done so for many years. Says he would like some input on protecting his stocks with leaps, and those are long-term options. He says he's very interested. He's built up about $65,000 in his portfolio of 5 stocks, and he doesn't want to lose that. So he'd like to protect it in case there's a 20% correction or more. And he'd like to know if I can offer some ideas. You know, hedging is a very tricky process that's only engaged by professionals, and hedge funds, of course, regularly use these strategies to reduce their risk exposure. In fact, that was the original intention of the hedge fund, to hedge risk. My suggestion is, if you are comfortable with leaps, okay, that might be one strategy, but when you're purchasing leaps, you have to keep in mind that they are offering you protection in the long haul. So if you think that this is going to be a brief downturn, then of course you would want shorter dated puts to protect you. Let's say that you're concerned about a 20% downdraft. If you simply purchase some long dated puts with only 2% of your portfolio, that would more than likely offset much of that 20% downdraft if it comes. And if the downdraft never comes, well, you can probably close out those puts and still walk away with some of the original purchase price. If you're convinced the market's getting ready to drop, what you can do is sell covered calls that are just slightly above the current strike price. If it turns out that the market pulls way back, well, you'll at least be able to receive instant payment, and you might be able to continually sell those covered calls. Keep in mind, you are risking having your shares called away from you, though. Bob, do you have any advice for folks that are worried about downdrafts?
Well, there's another way you can do it. You can short against the box. So if you're long, institute a short position, you freeze your position. It's a simpler way to do it.
It is simple. Shorting against the box is more simple, but the only problem is, Bob, it entails a tremendous amount of capital. Almost no one opens an account without margin today. So let's say he has $65,000, but maybe only $5,000 or $6,000 remaining margin. You can't short the box because it takes another $65,000 to do it. My suggestion is a little more modern. I like your idea if you have access to a lot of wealth. My suggestion is just take a fixed amount of puts. Okay, so for instance, 1% of your account. Stagger them out. Stagger the puts and over all 5 of your positions. And that way, if you're wrong, you've lost 1%. I mean, what's 1%? I mean, people drop 1% all the time in their accounts. But more than likely, it'll offset a very large portion of any major downdraft. That way you've got an insurance policy. You can sleep well at night. It's only going to cost you about $1,000 as opposed to having to try to come up with $65,000 additional. But I do like Bob's idea too. If you can short the box, if you can sell short against what you have, that is, of course, a perfect hedge. Next, Randy says, thank you so much. He says that we've done a lot to help him and give him good advice over the past couple of years, and he's now 100% into precious metals. He buys whenever he has some extra funds, and his original goal was just to keep up with inflation. Well, now he's over beyond that many-fold. It's become a family affair, and they're very much involved with investing every day. They have silver and gold investment groups. They're lowering their shipping and costs. He says we've been involved with saving many families from this utter financial destruction and helping to create wealth. And he says that only 2% of the people actually read information, actually act on it. So he just wants to thank us. Well, Randy, we thank you for your kind comments. I want to thank all the folks who've been helping us by sending in donations. We've had several of those. One of them this week, of course, was Isidore. So we want to thank Isidore and all the others who've added to our tip jar. It's much appreciated. And we also want to thank Mike for a $100 donation this week. Mike, it's a big help, and we very much appreciate your support. Okay, next up, a little correction here. Felipe Calderon is the current president of Mexico, and of course not Hugo Salinas. Okay, and the last one here, Trevor says, hi, Chris, I received Wealth Building Strategies this week. I'm very pleased with it for Christmas, and congratulations. Folks have been watching Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura. Alex Jones is a regular on the show. If you haven't put this one on your watch list, check out Conspiracy Theory. It's a TV show. It really delves into the New World Order and tries to take them on every single episode. Have you seen it, Bob?
Of course, yes. They're fine. The sponsor stopped their last program, which was about the internment camps that have been built in the United States, and the U.S. government stepped in and says you can't tell the people the truth.
And not only that, but did you know that they actually, as they were leaving, recorded those coffins, mass coffins, being removed from the site? They're obviously under surveillance at the time.
Letters, oh, we get letters. We get your letters every day.
For folks who'd like to call into our toll-free hotline, you can do so with no charge. It's 1-800-507-6531. That number again, 800-507-6531. You can call in, leave your questions and comments, whatever has been keeping you up at night, whatever you're interested in, maybe a particular stock, gold, silver, real estate. We'll do our best to find the answer for you. 1-800-507-6531. There's no silly questions. We'd like to hear from everybody. And, Bob, why don't you tell folks more about the International Forecaster, please?
Well, the Forecaster is about business, finance, economic, social, political issues all over the world. We publish by email on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and it runs around 40 pages each time. We have a hard copy that goes out twice a month for those who are not on the net, and everything that you need to know every week is in that publication. You can get a free introductory copy by going to theinternationalforecaster.com, theinternationalforecaster.com, or www.intforecaster.com. That's intforecaster.com. Or if you have a question you want to write, we answer everyone. And that address is Bob, B-O-B, at intforecaster.com. Bob at intforecaster.com. Or you can call 877-479-8178. That's toll free. 877-479-8178. Get a free introductory copy, or they have a special deal there where you can get a full year's subscription. And if you'd like to do that, you should look into that. I think it's a terrific deal.
All right, my friend. Well, I want to wish you a very safe and profitable week ahead.
Well, thank you very much.